I will talk about origami, from flapping birds to space telescopes, which is perhaps a metaphor from going from simplicity to complexity and back. But let's start with the simplicity, and the simplicity in origami are these simple things that we may have learned in elementary school. Flapping birds, which is the logo of today's conference. Bunnies, cootie catchers. That is simple, and yes, that is origami. The art of paper folding. It goes back hundreds of years in Japan. 1797, we find images of women playing with these strings. This is the traditional Japanese crane. People still fold it today. In fact, we found representations of that crane as far back as 1600. People have been folding paper for a long time. And in 1734, we find this book that shows not just the crane, but a paper boat, a little man, a cube. So they've been folding origami for a very long time, but it was simple. But that changed in the middle of the 20th century when this man came along. Akira Yoshizawa began creating new figures. He created hundreds of new figures of life and beauty, but he also created a language which allowed something new to happen. That language was a system of dashed lines, arrows, and dotted lines that let people build and communicate. And once they could do that and share, that led to complexity. Complexity in origami, more advances, longer sequences, more complex folding, and things like this. Because this is origami. This is one uncut sheet of paper. It's one of my designs. If you'll let me brag a little, it's got leaves, a deer's head, a cuckoo, pendulum, and it tells the correct time twice a day. Thank you. Modern origami can also be lifelike, though. We can get details like horns, hooves on an ibex, and even make things that may not even seem like folded paper. And these and hundreds of new designs by hundreds of new origami artists raise a new question of what really changed. And what I claim changed is that math came to origami. My artist friends get a little upset at this because they say, I'm an artist, how dare you accuse me of using math? But what I mean is that artists and mathematicians and people everywhere on the spectrum began using mathematical ideas to bridge the gap from simplicity to complexity. And so what I want to do is talk about how we make those connections. You might think that math is just arithmetic, or maybe algebra, it's manipulating letters, but math is the study of patterns and relationships. It's a way of describing, of handling and taming complexity. And so we can look at the patterns and relationships that happen in origami by making a plan of the folds. This is a plan of this simple folded shape. It's got two folds, one shaped like a valley, one shaped like a mountain. We call them mountain and valley folds, use different lines. And yes, this is a simple shape, but every origami figure, no matter how complex, is just valleys and mountain folds. And I'll show what this folds into a little bit later. A reasonable thing to ask is, what are the rules of these valleys and mountain folds? Could we make any old pattern of lines and have it fold into a shape? And the answer is no. There are definite rules. And you might think there may be hundreds and thousands of rules of great complexity, but it's not that way. Because in math, very often we find very simple rules give rise to very deep and rich and complex behavior. And in the world of origami, the rules of origami that fold flat are so few and so simple that we're all going to learn them right now. So here we go. And the first is a simple idea called two-colorability. It says if I take a crease pattern and I color it so adjacent regions are differently colored, I must be able to do that with just two colors. And you might know some patterns take 3 or 4. Origami, it must be doable with 2. If I count the numbers of mountains and valleys that come together at a point, we find the difference is plus minus 2, either 2 more or 2 less. Here's 3 valleys and 1 mountain. Here's 1 valley and 3 mountains. Here's 4 of one and 2 of the other, and that must hold at every interior point. If we were to measure the angles going around the point, let's number them in a cycle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If we cut it apart, we'd find the odd-numbered angles add up to a straight line. The even-numbered angles do as well. And that holds for every place where folds come together. And the last rule is a little harder to describe, but it captures a simple idea. The paper can't penetrate itself, so if a crease pattern tells us that a fold ends up next to a sheet, that sheet could end up below or above, but we can't have it end up between the layers because it would cut through. Two folds could be side by side or one wrapped around another, but they couldn't alternate this way because the paper would cut through itself. And that's it. If we design a pattern that satisfies those 4 rules, it's guaranteed to be foldable in origami. But you might well ask, is that useful, or is that just mathematicians off in the corner playing their games? But what we find is even these very simple rules, once we understand them, we can use those to build applications that tell us how to splice together pieces of crease pattern to make bigger and bigger things of more complexity. And that lets us create art, objects of beauty. But the interesting thing is exact same rules let us solve real-world practical problems, maybe even make money. And I'm going to describe examples of both of these, but I'm going to start with where my heart is, which is the art. And I'm going to start with a simple idea of repeating patterns, what I call textures in origami. If I take a sheet of paper and I make a bunch of vertical folds, and then I go back and I make a bunch of horizontal folds, when I'm done, I will end up with a little pattern of squares. And all by itself, that's boring. There's not much I can do with that. There's a little I can do with that. If I turn it, now I've got a pattern of diamonds. But that's about the limit. But once I know my rules, I can take a repeating pattern of folds like that. I can combine it with an entirely different pattern like these, which folds into a simple fish. But when I put them together, I can create art. This koi is a single uncut square. It has about 400 scales, takes about 8 hours to fold. If you don't have 8 hours, that's okay. You can fold something with fewer plates, but still put the plates on the back of a turtle. If you're feeling a little frisky, this rattlesnake has about 1,000 scales. And after I folded that, I swore I'd never do another 1,000-scaled rattlesnake, so this one has 1,500. But it also allows us to create textures on demand. Some years ago, I had a commission that had a repeating pattern, but the client wanted it designed, folded, and photographed within a week. And so here's how it came together. Start with my pattern, entire crease pattern, then start folding. Begin with a square, transfer fold lines onto the square, and then start folding on those lines. And fold it a little bit more. The last part got pretty intricate, but when we were done, 50 stars and 13 stripes for an American flag. So you might think math is only good for very geometric things, repeating patterns, but the place where math had the biggest role was in representational design. This is the equation of how to fold an origami shape. I start with an idea, combine it with a square, I get a fold, and that's all there is to it, right? Well, no, there's more to it than that. I'm being kind of symbolic with these shapes, and you might even question whether we can be so precise about folding a beetle, because beetles have head, thorax, and abdomen, 6 legs, antennas, and jaws. Can you be so precise and fold it? And the answer is we can.